Hi everyone, and a very, very warm welcome to all for this special webinar for the HiPo Week 2018. This is Esther from People Matters, and I welcome you to the HiPo Week 2018, a week-long learning journey with industry leaders with whom we're going to be learning throughout the week. And I'm sure you're going to be very excited to participate and be active on the activities that we've planned for you. This is our 6th consecutive edition along with Right Management and People Matters. We're very excited to bring you the HiPo Week once again with fresh perspectives. In the first year, we covered the initial stages of HiPo program. This year, we are going to focus on the impact that digital is having in high potential programs. And we're very, very excited to kick off this with this exclusive webinar that we're going to be having today with both Gajendra Chandel and Prashant Pandey. I would like to thank Right Management and specifically Prashant, who supported us in making this annual initiative possible. So thank you so much, Prashant, and your team for supporting us.
Thank you. So really look forward to this one.
So Right Management, as all of you know, is a 35-year experience organization in career management and talent strategy. They provide smart and targeted strategies and solutions that align with culture, values, vision, and objectives of the organization. I think their experience of working with brands across the world in career management is what has really fueled the agenda of everything that we're going to be experiencing this week, and their insights and their research as well. So we have an exciting lineup of activities this week. You will be able to see them on our website. So if you go to peoplematters.in and you follow #HiPoWeek, you'll be able to see all that is happening. And please do feel free to share it with your friends and colleagues as well, so they can also benefit from this learning journey. So let's start with our first webcast. So the topic that we're using for this introductory webcast is digital disruption. How will the roles of HiPo evolve? And it's a pleasure to have with us Gajendra Chandel, CHRO of Tata Motors, as well with Prashant Pandey, country head at Right Management. So very warm welcome, Gajendra, as well for your side.
Thank you. My pleasure.
So before we start, Prashant, do you want to say a few words about the HiPo Week 2018, and then we quickly will move straight away into the webcast.
Sure. Thanks, Esther. And to begin with, let me first thank you and the entire People Matters team. It's been a pleasure working with the entire team for the past 6 years, and I think what we have created is something which has become an important part of the HR calendar annually. And I speak to a lot of clients, and they tell me that they have now started looking forward to the HiPo Week year on year. So thank you once again.
You're welcome.
In terms of the theme this year, I think couple of things that I realized that organizations are facing nowadays. One, Manpower Group spoke about we living in the human age, right? So where the potential of the human is going to be the big differentiator for organizations to have a leadership position in their specific industry. So that was something that was spoken about. And then there was a lot of conversation around we living in the digital age, where digital disruption is impacting business models. We are seeing new leaders emerge in every industry, established players being knocked off from their leadership positions, and it's largely happened because of what and how organizations deal with technology. Now, what we realized is that there's a beautiful intersection in terms of the world that we are living in. One, which is the human age and the digital age coming in together, and one impacting the another, right? It's human potential, which is allowing us to use digital to its optimal capacity. And that is really impacting the speed and the agility with which the digital world is evolving. So that is on one side. On the other side, in this digital age, if you don't use human potential to its optimal capacity, you will fall by the wayside. Right, so this whole intersection of the human age and the digital age is a very interesting world that we lived in, and we thought this year it will be an interesting about, specifically in the context of the high potentials, right? So, and that's why we thought in terms of while organizations speak about high potentials extensively, in this whole new age, in this whole world where digital is being a bit disruptor, what is the role that organizations are expecting high potentials to play, so that they are able not only to use digital as a trigger for business, for their business disruption, but also also make those changes in the organization so that the changes are more sustainable. And that we thought would be an interesting topic to explore this year.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Prashant, for setting the context. So I'm going to quickly jump straight to the first question, Gajendra, for yourself, and with a beautiful context from Prashant. Why is it important to talk about high potentials in the context of digital? And you represent an organization that, it's a brick and mortar traditional organization who's actually transforming very rapidly. So why is it important to talk about high potentials in the digital context?
So first of all, thank you for the invitation for joining in for this discussion.
Welcome.
And, I myself learn a lot about these discussions because when you asked this question, I was wondering, I have never come across this kind of interesting intersection. And what Prashant also mentioned, you talk of high potentials, yes, in the organization. You talk about digital, yes, but you don't talk about HiPos in the context of a digital age. So it set me thinking, what does it actually mean?
Correct.
And then I realized that, yeah, it means a lot actually, and it is very meaningful to discuss, and it's good time to discuss this. So you see, every organization worth its salt has been discussing about high potentials, managing high potentials and high performers for a long period of time. Now, if you really see high potentials and the entire talent in any organization, they operate in a certain ecosystem. And today the ecosystem is being heavily influenced by the digital world and the digital age. So obviously the high potentials will also get impacted by these changes in the ecosystem. So when I look back into my own organization, I see that the digital is impacting the organization in very different ways in different parts of the organization. For example, I have the customer-facing organization, which is sales, service, marketing, spares, and all that. Yeah, and I see a lot of analytics and digital being used for different reasons. One, for gauging about what the customers' expectations are and what the experiences of our customers have been. And it is in the context of the changing competitive scenario in our world of automotive. Because the technology is also changing towards more electric, more connected vehicles, etc., etc. So in that context, how do you manage the experiences and expectations of the customers? It is handled in a digital world very differently today. People are not expecting that they come to the showrooms only. Of course, in India, it is still very prevalent that people buying a car, for example, is an event for the family. But people want to see and compare without going to 10 different showrooms or 10 cars being brought to them. So it is being handled very differently in our customer-facing organization. So our high potentials who deal with that or who are in that part of the organization are changing the ways and means of approaching the customers, gauging the customers' expectations and needs very differently. Yeah. So we are, for example, we have deployed in many of our showrooms. So that's one of the part of the digital that is deployed in our showrooms, where customers don't have to see 20 different vehicles at the same time to make a choice. They may see two or three. After they have shortlisted, they may see two or three, not more than that. Similarly, when I look at my manufacturing organization, very different. The digital is impacting our supply chain completely. Yeah. Similarly, when I look at the product development organization or R&D organization, once again, today, a lot of designing, for example, building the vehicles, it's more done digitally than the cars are actually physically assembled for testing on the tracks. And they are sent for homologation and road testing, etc. So a lot of work, instead of being done on the test tracks of the company, it's being done digitally, sitting on the computers. Our people, our engineers are able to do that. So it's changing very differently. So the high potentials in those environments are dealing with their respective part of the organizational role very differently as compared to what they were doing just 2, 3, 4 years ago.
Correct.
So it is impacting in a big way the way they deal with their subject areas, which is their functional responsibilities, and their people. Now, there are lesser people in our crash testing facility, in our various kinds of other testing facilities, including, for example, we have this NVH, yeah, testing facility. They are able to do it on the computers. All simulations are available. They are able to do it. And people don't have to be sweating it out in the sun all the time because all conditions are simulated on the computer itself. So the way our high potential
Thanks,
manage
Gajendra,
this
for
is
sharing the
changing
context on
dramatically.
how high potential, why is high potential important in the context of digital, and how is that affecting the different parts of Tata Motors business. So Prashant, tell us more about how do you see that, because you work with organizations across different industries. So give us some insights about how and why high potentials in the context of digital is such an important topic, and how you've seen it maybe in different examples of other industries as well.
Sure. As part of my reading last week, I came across this interesting article, which was from the Singularity University, and the professors came together in terms of predicting certain future milestones in terms of what organizations and people in general are going to see in terms of how life is going to change because of technology. And let me share a few insights. While it's a very detailed report, a few interesting ones that I picked up from that report, just to give an insight in terms of how technology is going to impact our world going forward. So what they say is by 2020, flying car operations are going to start across a lot of countries globally. So that was one thing that they spoke about. They also spoke about how by 2020, the medical-based diagnostics is going to be a big thing in the US healthcare, and steadily is going to percolate into other geographies globally also. They also spoke about 2022, 3D printing is going to be a big thing, and printing of clothing is going to be something that's going to start. They also say that by 2024, approximately 1 billion daily drone flights are going to happen. And if you compare with the approximate 100,000 of daily airline flights, you can imagine how transportation of individuals or people and things is going to change drastically by 2024. They also speak about by 2028, solar and wind energy is going to represent nearly 100% of the new electricity that's going to get generated. The reason why I'm quoting these points is basically trying to, something that we all really understand and appreciate, how digital is really impacting us on a daily basis, and how business models are getting impacted on a daily basis. Now, if you think in terms of high potential, now if you really think in terms of what high potentials are expected to do in organizations, they are the ones who really need to think ahead of the curve in terms of appreciate and understand how technology is going to impact their business models, and what they need to do in case they need to stay ahead of their peer companies so that their leadership position is not getting impacted. Now, if that is the role that the HiPos really need to play, and if this is the speed of the technology disruption that we are talking about, and in that context, then how HiPos really need to understand, appreciate the role that they are expected to play is going to be a big conversation in organizations. Where it's a very relevant conversation that organizations really need to have, and hence relooking in terms of how we identify HiPos, how we engage with them is a conversation I think organizations seriously need to have in the days to come.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks, Prashant. So, Gajendra, I'm coming back to you on just taking the cue from Prashant's last point about how is the way that you are identifying hypos changed? Is your definition of a hypo changed, or formally, or do you think it's something that is actually going as the organization transforms and changes towards digital, then hypos also get changed? Tell us a little bit more about whether what you look for in a high potential, has that changed?
So, Esther, really speaking, the way you look at the hypos in terms of their competence, etc., hasn't changed much actually. Because the very definition of HiPos, the first thing we look at is how are they able to deal with the ambiguity, for example.
Correct.
Yeah. In fact, how much they love ambiguity, because that's getting created all the time continuously.
Yeah.
The second is how are they able to deal with people? How are they able to deal with the ecosystem?
Yeah.
What kind of influencing skills do they have? Yeah, so we have two dimensions of looking at our HiPos. One dimension we call as leadership challenge inventory. So, what kind of challenges do they have? Yeah, and the other is what kind of strengths do they have, yeah, that they demonstrate. So, those are not actually changing.
Correct.
Digital is something which is which is more technical and looked at technologically. So we look at the people who are able to, they have high learning ability, for example. That's another dimension of
Yeah.
the high potentials. So the definition of high potentials is not changing. It is equipping these high potentials to deal with the changed environment, especially in view of the digital and AI, etc., that's coming more and more. So when after we have selected the high potentials, when we take them through a year-long development program, for example, they are exposed more towards new technologies and digital than we have done ever in the past. Their live business impact projects that they are supposed to undertake, those are all driven on the platform of digital and analytics. So fundamentally, the competence, the mindset of a high potential is not changing, but the way they deal with it is changing, and which is equipped over a period of time to these people, because they visit, for example, they spend time with our dealerships, they spend time with our suppliers, etc. So we specifically, the projects that are assigned to them, we specifically ask them to work on the digital platforms.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that's how we are equipping them over a period of time.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thanks, Gajendra, for
Yeah.
that. Yes, Prashant, I'd love to hear whether you've seen organization actually changing the definition and adding new dimensions before of the because
Yeah, I completely agree with Gajendra. Per se, the definition of hypo may not fundamentally change. So in my mind, probably there still would be somebody who would act ordinarily in an extraordinary circumstance, or probably in an ordinary circumstance will come out with an extraordinary idea and trigger change, or a combination of both. In today's world, probably it's an extraordinary world that we are living in, and hypos are expected to function extraordinarily. So that's the combination. This combination is basically bringing in that additional dynamics, and hence probably what is changing, not necessarily the definition, but the expectation that an organization will have from hypo, that definitely is changing. For example, a few years back, the hypos were probably, in terms of getting them exposed and putting them in the firing line immediately, probably the organization was slightly more circumspect. Today, I don't think organizations have the luxury of wait and watch, and hence the agility with which they need to perform and relook at the business model is changing. Hence, the agility expected from hypos that the business are having from them, that is definitely a sea change. The hypos today, their expectation is that they are able to foresee in terms of and predict in terms of what are the changes that consumer behaviors are going to foresee, and then appreciating in terms of what changes that they need to bring in their business models, and hence driving changes in the organization. And the time that you have to do this, that time is basically shrinking, and hence the expectations are from hypos is that much more higher. And probably today they are under much more pressure than they were probably 3 years back. And that is one change that I'm seeing that hypos are experiencing for themselves.
Yeah, wonderful. Thanks, Prashant. So, how are we enabling those hypos in terms of developing them, supporting them, and what are we doing differently? Considering, as you said, the pressure is higher, probably the skills required change a lot more rapidly. And so on the one hand, maybe we haven't changed the definition, but definitely probably we have to change the way we enable them and develop them. So any insights on the development side that both of you could share?
Sure. So from my perspective, and I'm very keen to listen to Gajendra in terms of what his experiences and what the shifts that he has personally seen in Tata Motors. But working across organizations, over the last few years, I have seen there's been a fundamental shift. Generally, the way organizations are looking at their processes in general, and specifically high potential programs. I remember a few years back, the whole paradigm that organizations had that my industry is very different, my challenges are very unique, and hence my learning will happen from somebody who has a very strong functional experience in my industry. I think that has been a fundamental shift in that mindset and that outlook. People have realized that if I stay within the confines of my industry, my learning is going to be limited. And hence, I need to expose my leaders, my high potential and specific to industries other than mine and get them to appreciate what they are doing in their own industries in terms of appreciating how technology is disrupting their industry and bringing in those insights. So that perspective, that widening of that perspective for the HiPo in terms of understanding in general, zooming out and looking in terms of how people behaviors in general are changing and hence the impact that my industry will have and other industries are going to have. That I think people generally have organizations have realized, and there's a huge shift in terms of how do I expose my leaders, my high potentials to industries other than mine? Because otherwise there are a lot of traditional industries where leaders have spent 15, 20 years in the same industry, and then there are blinkers in terms of this is what happens in my industry and this is what happens, and hence how do you expose them? A case in point that I would want to share with you is, for example, one of the engineering companies that we work with. Very clearly, when we discuss this aspect in terms of their insights in terms of what's happening in other industries, there's limited appreciation around that. Clearly, they were very open in terms of exposing them. And then what we did is took the high potentials from this engineering organization and inserted them for a couple of days in an FMCG and automobile company. And when they came back, their perspective in terms of how, for example, an automobile company or an FMCG company is using technology in terms of analyzing consumer behavior, drawing insights from them, and then re-looking at the business models in terms of where change really needs to happen. I think that was an excellent example of immersive learning, and that's a huge change that I'm seeing in terms of how people are looking at their high potential programs.
Wonderful. Thanks, Prashant, for sharing that perspective of more broader experiences, really, and that's one point you've seen across industries. So how is Tata Motors, Gajendra, changing the way you're enabling and developing high potentials?
So, Esther, first and foremost, I think high potential is a very broad terminology or word. And it can mean very differently to different organizations, and within the organization also it can mean very differently. For example, in our organization, of course, high potential is a high potential, but then we have high potentials at different levels. So high potentials who are at the entry level, when we look at, they are the high potentials for going over to take over the first time managerial roles. It's very different from those who will take the managerial roles to the next level, which is mid-management level, where they will lead the subunit or the smaller unit. So they are provided very different exposure, for example, to be part of the industry bodies. We have representations, for example, either at the industry body of automotive, which is called SIAM, Society of Indian Automotive Manufacturers. Similarly, representations to the governments about the regulations which are coming in, because our industry is also heavily regulated. So they are provided experience that they will be expected to deal with over the next couple of years. So that's how we prepare our high potentials. for the future.
Yeah. So I have a question to both of you on the layer of new technologies. And so when we're talking about exposure to industries, exposure to leadership positions or people positions, what about exposure to hard technologies, which are more futuristic, which probably the organization does not necessarily have capabilities in-house, but things that are really going to change, whether we're talking about AI, blockchain, things that probably we're not necessarily using today on a day-to-day, but we want to expose those high potentials into those hard technologies. Is that something that you're doing across the board, or is that something that you're doing depending on the role and what the requirement of that role is?
So, Esther, once again, it depends on what is expected of these high potentials over the next 2, 3 years, 5 years.
Yeah.
So, for example, if I talk of people at the middle management or at the entry level managerial positions, they are provided with the fundamentals of all these technologies, whether it is AI, whether it is now we are not even talking of AR and VR, etc. We are talking of MR, mixed reality. Yeah. So they are provided with all these exposures, blockchain, etc., etc. But in the context of the roles that they are expected to do over the next couple of years. So, for example, when we talk of our senior managers, they are provided exposure through our technology partners also. So, for example, we work with various technology partners like Microsoft, etc. People at the senior management levels are given that exposure to work with the technologies being developed by our technology partners. Whereas people at the middle and the junior management level, they are given exposure to work in our technology centers, yeah, where it is going to hit the ground in the next 1 or 2 years. Whereas the people at the senior management level, they are to deal with how will they think of their businesses 5 to 10 years from today.
Yeah.
So that's how it is different.
Yeah. Go ahead, Prashant.
Yeah, and I agree with what Gajendra said. It has to be very contextual to the role that they need to play. And you're right, Esther, to the extent that they need to be exposed to newer technology. But here we are not talking about high potentials being technology. They're not tech guys. You're not trying to convert them into tech guys. What they need to understand the power of the technology and how it can impact their business. So, for example, if we talk about AI, how can AI be used in their context from a customer service perspective, right? So let's stay closer to our domain, which is HR, right? So from a recruitment, talent acquisition, yesterday you had this whole conversation on talent acquisition, right? So how AI or robotics, for example, or chatbots can be used in that context. Now, if that appreciation, a high potential can visualize, can appreciate what this technology means and what it can do to my business model and how it can change my internal process or a customer facing process. If that appreciation that they are able to bring in, I think that is good enough. However, a high potential today will need to work very closely with functional experts, tech experts, to an extent that language that they speak and their ability to explain how they are reimagining this new process to work is something that they have to articulate in a very lucid manner. And hence their appreciation of the technology for high potential becomes extremely critical. We can clearly draw a parallel in terms of the ERP implementation. If you can think of all the ERP companies, they had these tech guys and they had these functional experts, right? So there would be an internal HR guy who will then, be able to have this conversation with the tech guy in terms of how do you do a SAP implementation in terms of repurposing that basic platform to suit my organization. It's something similar, right? But more intense and more deeper in terms of, and one of the examples that I would give you in terms of how technology, for example, is changing lives of an organization is about this healthcare company that we work with and how it's impacting their internal process. Now, this, as part of some of the work that we were doing for this healthcare companies, I obviously got an opportunity to interact with some of their senior leadership in the organization. And during the entire conversation that it really got me to wonder that this medical devices company is increasingly morphing into a tech company. they are talking about IoT, AI, analytics getting into their devices. They're talking about, and this is not, we are not talking about futuristic. We are talking about all this happening in the next 3 to 5 years.
Yeah.
One drop of blood going into these devices will not only give out the entire medical history of this individual, but will get into preventive Medicare. Now, that's the reality that we are talking about in terms of now when we are talking to the leaders over here, they tell me that the type of talent that they are hiring is undergoing a change. The language that their R&D professionals really need to speak is undergoing a change. Now, that is something that we need to be appreciative of. So while they will not become tech guys, but their appreciation of technology, new technology, and how it's going to impact, that definitely needs to go up a few notches.
Yeah, wonderful. Thanks, Prashant. And I'm conscious about time as well for everyone, our viewers as well. And I can't even believe that it's gone so fast. So I'm going to ask you a closing question to both of you. For many of our viewers who probably have not yet started to think about the digital context, and probably the digital context is being spoken about, as Gajendra started with, in different parts of the business, but not necessarily in the context of high potentials. So what is the advice that you like to give them in terms of one thing that they should start doing and one thing that they should stop doing on contextualizing their HiPo programs in the digital context? Who will like to start? One thing to start doing, one thing to stop doing as we close the webinar.
Okay,
Sure.
I think in my view, Esther, start doing is exposing the HiPos to the entire ecosystem of business, not just within their respective functional areas, but much more. So if there is a high potential, for example, Prashant was talking about in human resources, not just how the technology is impacting the delivery of services or design and delivery of services and experience to the employees, but must understand that in what context and what ecosystem do our people in the organization and outside the organization work. Yeah. So, for example, if it is a talent acquisition, and we were there at your talent acquisition conference yesterday, I did not see too much of how our people are building the ecosystem. How are we working with, for example, the research labs? How are we working with universities? How are we working with the government? Yeah. So I think it is important and it's critical for the industry leaders, and if they are, especially if they are high potentials, to start thinking about the technology, including the digital world, in how is it going to change and how is it now working in the entire ecosystem, and not just within the company or just in the immediate neighborhood of the company. Yeah. So it has to be much more than that. So that's what the high potentials need to understand, because they also impact their ecosystem as the ecosystem impacts the working of our people, especially the high potentials.
Yeah.
So we need to provide that experience, exposure, and understanding of the people, and actually bring in those people. Yeah. So when we are grooming our high potentials, the development program of a year and a half, that the structured program that they go through, we bring in these stakeholders to the classroom and take our people to their workplaces. Yeah, that's very important to do. So we should stop thinking about that it's only being impacted by the ecosystem. We are also impacting them. So it's important that our people go out and see how the ecosystem of the government is working. For example, if it is relating to regulations, how are research labs in the country working? How the universities, especially from the HR point of view, for example. Similarly, bring them into the classroom and to interact with our people. And in fact, in some of the cases, what we have done is brought those people to mentor the projects that our people are going to run in the organization and outside the organization. So that's what is required to be done by the organizations, I think.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. Thanks, Gajendra. Prashant, one thing to start doing, one thing to stop doing.
Sure. So I think start doing one again, as Gajendra said, get them exposure about the entire organizational ecosystem. I would advise them probably to go a step further after exposing them to the entire organizational ecosystem. Expose them to multiple industries. So that I think would be an extremely important element to do. Second thing is give them exposure, appreciation of the newer technologies and what does that mean. If they can sit and write down on a piece of paper, draw the business model, and very quickly, say that this is the technology that will impact this part of my business. And if you don't do it in the next 3 years, 4 years, what the impact would be. If they can do that, I think that appreciation start doing. Stop doing, I would say, stop being circumspect about your high potential programs. Stop thinking in how much to do. Should I do it immediately? Should I wait? I don't think organizations have time. It's the organizations today need to be extremely agile. We are in a very fast-paced environment, and if we don't take the lead, somebody else would, and then we'll be left behind. So we have to stop being circumspect and doing a high potential programs in a half-baked manner. We just have to go all out. So that's from a stop doing perspective. Continue, I think. I would, organizations, when we used to do, we do a lot of strategy work for organizations, helping organizations define their strategy. And remember, the government had something called a Panchavarshiya Yojana, which was a 5-year plan, right? And organizations, when they worked on the strategies, they used to, at one point of time, 4 years, 5 years back, used to have a time frame of 5 years. I think that is no more relevant. Today, organizations work on the strategy documents which have a life of 2 years, at best 3 years. And I think the same applies in terms of their the high potential programs. Organizations will need to continue to be extremely agile in terms of revisiting the high potential programs, the elements of the high potential programs. They will need to continue redesigning them and dropping out elements which are not working, bringing in elements which make sense. And I think from that, so continue re-looking your high potential program and re-engineer it on a continual basis. I think that is what I would want to say.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. Thanks, Prashant. Thanks, Gajendra. We really have run out of time, but I think it's been a fantastic conversation. I want to thank you for being here with us and open the HiPo Week 2018. So thank you so much.
Thank you, Esther. Thanks, Gajendra.
So for all of you, please stay tuned this week. There's a lot of activities that are coming up, and follow the hashtag #HiPoWeek for more. And we look forward to welcome you in our next activity. Thank you so much and have a great day.
Thanks.
Thank you.